In September 2022, the moral police group Gasht-e-Irshad tortured Mahsa Amini and then killed her. This brought the issue of civil liberties in Iran to the forefront. The incident occurred at a time when Iran celebrated the 43rd year of its Islamic Revolution amidst the all-encompassing protests by different sections of the civil society. On September 17, protests were reported from Saktez in western Iran shortly after Amini's death, with chants of murder because of the scarf. When will we allow this? And Khomeini's demise. Even though Amini's death was the main catalyst for these changes, many other protests in Iran in 2022 mostly question the relationship between liberty of being and collective security, which was the foundation of the revolution. The collective security of Shiite messianism, territory, and economic proclivity was at the center of the Islamic Revolution. In return, the revolution demanded certain citizen liberties that had been prevalent during the Iranian monarchy's decades of rule. However, Iran has been unable to fulfill its promises for 43 years, resulting in the transaction's current collapse. The transaction's failure highlights not only a political risk that is widespread throughout the region as a whole but also a risk for the revolution's foundations. Even if the regime is able to withstand the ongoing pressure from civil society, the grievances may ultimately result in questions about authority, something that the revolution attempted to weaken through the transaction. Iran is a republic and an Islamic state. While the elected government is led by a president, an assembly of experts selects the supreme leader, who is regarded as the highest authority. One is a constitutional figure, and the other shows religious symbolism as well as the spiritual identity that is woven into Iran's identity. However, when the president and the supreme leader are at odds, these cracks in the regime's fabric are exposed. In contrast to the contentious ties that existed between former President Rouhani and Khomeini, the election of President Raisi in July 2021 demonstrated once more that the two authorities could work together. The ideals of Shiite messianism, such as opposing the United States, eradicating Israel, and vowing to export the Islamic Revolution, are frequently juxtaposed with the contentions. According to Arabi, these ideals share similarities with Sunni Islamism, which is followed by terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. However, the regime is willing to at least partially abandon the other two ideals in addition to eliminating Israel. In spite of the clamor for the removal of sanctions and the continuation of the JCPOA, Raisi has indicated in his statements that he is willing to comply. In contrast, Iran's export of the Islamic Revolution has largely vanished, and its limited influence in the Levant has also decreased. The situation in 2022 is hostile to Iranian interests, in contrast to the Arab Spring of 2011, which Iran secretly dreaded but called the Islamic Awakening in public. Iran's pragmatic policy has prevailed over ideological considerations ever since the Arab Spring. However, prominent examples of when pragmatism fails include Hezbollah's electoral defeat in the Lebanese general elections in May 2022, Muqtada al-Sadr's anti-Iran stance in Iraq, and Assad's outreach to the Gulf. In a similar vein, Iran's unsuccessful attempts to establish relationships with the Afghan Taliban and Al-Qaeda failed. Leaders attempt to shift the population's focus toward either economic growth or territorial sovereignty when both pragmatism and ideology fail. But what if there is no alternative? On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone strike claimed the life of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani close to the Baghdad International Airport. Since then, a number of prominent Iranians have been killed in multiple other assassinations. While the death of Soleimani united Iranians and stoked anti-US sentiment in support of the regime, the leadership's lack of a clear response implied the regime's vulnerability. After that, the Iranian economy was impacted by the effects of COVID-19 beginning in March 2020, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Since then, food products have experienced a 300% increase in inflation, with flour selling for 160,000 rials per kilogram, a $4.65 billion trade deficit, a 60% increase in tax revenues, and a decline in growth to 27% in 2022 from 43% in 2021. In the past, in June 2021, Iranian oil workers went on strike for a week at 60 oil and petrochemical facilities to demand better wages and working conditions. In a similar vein, Iran's oil production has decreased to 2.558 million barrels per day in 2022. Significantly below the 4.038 million barrels per day that were anticipated for 2023. Tehran will have a difficult time halting the 40% increase in inflation if this trend continues. Since the beginning of 2022, this has resulted in a fresh wave of protests from all segments of civil society. A large number of people took to the streets in support of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, dismayed by the strong, centralized state with fabricated liberties and the modernization measures implemented by the former King Reza Shah Pahlavi. The Shah, who supported the West and the United States, was overthrown by a regime that was ready to assert Iran's religious authority not only within its borders but also outside of them. According to Sempa, the failure of modernization to create loyalty to his regime was the reason for the Shah's downfall. The former supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, brought the principles of nostalgia back to a nation with the largest Shiite population and a long history of civilization. On April 1, 1979, Iran became an Islamic republic after a nationwide referendum. However, as time went on, the new regime's fear of dissent grew. However, according to Igman survey, Iranians' attitudes toward the regime have changed significantly after 43 years of the revolution. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah who was overthrown by the regime, has 39% of the admirers, followed by President Raisi with 17%. A secular democratic republic is the choice of a growing number of people, with some even calling for a constitutional monarchy. Despite this, Iranians continue to admire a strong unitary state that does not have a religious leader. While the sample size could be questioned, the survey's findings are supported in part by videos of protesters clashing with IRGC personnel and the police and the outcry expressed on social media by both unverified and verified Twitter accounts. The protests that followed Mahsa Amini's death have now been going on for 3 weeks. In contrast, media reports claim that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khomeini is being monitored by a doctor. According to other reports, there may have been political strife between President Raisi and Mojtaba, the son of Khomeini, who is vying to become the next supreme leader. The IRGC may also attempt a coup in the post-Khomeini era, according to more unverified reports, though the likelihood of this happening is negligible. Protesters have gathered in more than 75 cities in less than 15 days in the midst of political infighting that is hidden from view by those in positions of authority. Iranian diaspora protests against the regime were also reported from London, UK, Baghdad, Iraq, and a planned protest on October 2 in Paris, France. Over 80 people have died so far, and hundreds more have been injured or imprisoned. The casualty count is more than 200. According to unconfirmed Iranian sources. The internet and social media continue to be affected. The ongoing protests have demonstrated that dissent will continue in Iran, despite the possibility of the regime's survival. Not that it never existed, but disillusionment with the regime has recently become public. As a result, Iran's struggle between individual liberty and collective security may continue, with the regime likely agreeing to minor concessions in order to maintain their power and, more importantly, the supreme leader's legitimacy.